I'm Nicole Davidson, and this is the Negotiation in Real Life podcast, the show where we take the lessons learned in real life negotiations to help you build your negotiation toolkit. We'll be hearing from lawyers, entrepreneurs, and senior business people about their best and worst negotiations. Negotiation is one of the most important skills for success in business and in life, but it's a skill we are rarely taught. For many of us, we develop our skills purely through trial and error. We see what works, discard what doesn't, and if we're lucky, we'll have a few good mentors along the way. In this podcast, we're going to give you access to an even greater range of negotiation mentors. Enjoy this episode, and please reach out if you have any questions. Today, I'm doing something a little bit different. We've now completed season 1 of the podcast, and we've had 10 fantastic guests who've all generously shared their negotiation stories, the lessons they've learned along the way, and some tips that you can use to build your negotiation skills. We started the season with the wonderful Alex Martin of Taurus Legal Management. What I loved about Alex is that having been both a lawyer and the CEO of a commercial business, he brings a really commercial approach to his litigation negotiations. Alex shared with us the stories of various negotiations where he's had to take a slightly non-legal view to get to an outcome. I loved the story he shared where, in fact, it was a real change of dynamics that actually got to a resolution in the negotiation. After a very heated dispute, many negotiations between the lawyers, what really resolved that in the end was taking the lawyers out of it. And it was the two participants in the negotiation themselves that bumped into each other in the street, and over a beer, they were able to resolve that. And I think that happens on a fairly regular basis, that the process of going through the legal dispute is an important one, but ultimately you sometimes need to take the law out of it to get to an outcome. In episode 2, I spoke with entrepreneur Richard Lau. Richard's currently the CEO of Logo.com, but he's had a series of successful businesses, negotiating not only the contracts and the way that those businesses needed to run, but negotiating exits from those businesses as well. Richard generously shared with us a story of one of his less successful negotiations earlier in his career, where he was negotiated out of a bonus that he could have been entitled to because he felt that he needed to preserve the relationship with the person that he was negotiating with. I think this happens to all of us at some time or another, where there is a certain degree of emotional blackmail that's used to get us to give up on things that we might otherwise be entitled to. Richard's story was a great reminder of how to deal with this, and a reminder that we need to have this confidence in our own negotiation to be able to stand up to people who will try to take away things that we should be able to have. In episode 3, I spoke with Alice Ruhr, an insolvency practitioner who has to negotiate in some fairly tough circumstances. Insolvency tends to be an area where negotiations can be a little bit more zero-sum game. There's no value to be created. It's really just arguing about who gets the dollars. And that can lead people to fairly frustrated behaviour, fairly protective and also aggressive behaviour in those negotiations. So Alice shared with us some of the challenges that she's faced, and particularly how it's really important to check the dynamics of the negotiation and who's in the room. She gave us one example of a negotiation where it was really important that the bankrupt was not part of the process, because although it was his bankruptcy, he was not the one that stood to lose through the negotiations. And it was important that he wasn't there protecting his own reputation at the expense of his wife, who would actually be the one losing assets through the deal. In episode 4, we moved away from insolvency to tax. This is another area that can often be a bit of a zero-sum game in negotiation. We spoke with Josie Gangemi, the principal of Tax Debt Solutions Australia. Josie's a specialist tax negotiator, and she talked about the importance of understanding the way that organisations such as the ATO make their decisions. As a former employee of the ATO, Josie is particularly well placed to assist her clients by having that inside running that is so essential, particularly in a negotiation where the client or the taxpayer often has very little power against the ATO. I found that one a really fascinating discussion. In episode 5, I spoke to Finn Bowd. Finn is a lawyer, but she's shaking up the legal industry, working very hard to find new ways for legal practice to operate and for lawyers to have a different way of managing their careers. Finn's had very deep experience of negotiations throughout her career, and particularly some very large-scale deals. In our discussion, we spoke about some of the negotiations in Finn's earlier career where she had to deal with very significant multi-billion-dollar deals. We talked about some of the challenges of dealing with large government organisations who have the power to stonewall negotiations and stop them in their tracks. We looked at processes you might look at for stakeholder analysis to work out if there's other people rather than the direct people you're negotiating with who can help you maneuver the way through. We talked about understanding the impacts and knowing when it's time to stop negotiating, because the risk of getting an unsuccessful deal means that the resources that you're putting forward just aren't worth it. Episode 6 saw us talking with another entrepreneur, Tal Evans. Tal has been a successful operator in the IT sector for over 20 years. He shared with us one of his larger acquisitions, which all came down to some troubles caused because the vendor hadn't been through this process before. So we had a discussion about how, even though you know what the process is and it's a pretty simple process, this transaction nearly fell over because what was standard process was seen as quite untrusting and offensive to the vendor. So Tal talked about his experience of this and how he then went about rebuilding his relationship with the vendor to ensure a successful sale process. Episode 7 with Neil McKay, a finance provider for small, medium enterprises, was another one where we really got to look at some of the challenges of negotiating when you're in a small business compared with a large business. Having come out of GE, a mega business with lots of support for his negotiations, Neil shared some of what he needed to go through to change his approach to negotiations when that support team was no longer around him. I moved back to speaking to not only a lawyer, but an insolvency lawyer in episode 8 with Chloe Morfoot. Chloe is a partner at FAL Lawyers, and we discussed some of the challenges of being inexperienced and young. For many of us, as we start our careers, we're often negotiating against people more senior than us who think that they might be able to leverage their extra experience to get a better deal from us. So we talked about some of Chloe's experiences, some ideas to help manage that challenge. And we also delved a little bit into the challenge of gender in negotiations as well. We continued the theme of gender into episode 9, where I spoke with Tanya Jolly of Lashes of Change and DNA Security Solutions. As a business owner, Tanya's had many negotiations through that time, and she talked about her method of dealing with negotiations with men and what the impact has been of that for her. We also talked about her experience learning negotiation at Stanford and what benefits having some formal training in negotiation has brought to her. Our final episode for season 1 was with another lawyer, but an in-house lawyer. So Theo Capodistrius doesn't work for a law firm. He provides legal services in-house to organisations. We talked about, once again, some of the challenges of dealing with large organisations. It's a common theme throughout. How do you deal with these large organisations that are demanding of how the negotiation proceeds and have more power in the negotiation? We talked again about those challenges that we have when we're dealing with larger, more well-resourced counterparts, and how we can stand back to actually slow things down and have some control over the negotiation process ourselves. It was another interesting discussion. I've really enjoyed recording season 1 of the Negotiation in Real Life podcast and talking with all of my fabulous guests who've been so generous in sharing their time and their stories. I hope you've enjoyed the season and have taken away some great tips to build on your own negotiation skills. We're going to be taking a short break now before we join you in a couple of months' time for season 2. If you've got any ideas of people you'd like to hear from about their negotiation stories, please reach out. We'd love to get in touch with them and invite them onto the show. We've got some fabulous guests lined up already, but there's more spaces available. If you've got any other tips of what you'd like to hear on the podcast or any ideas for things that we can add to the show, I'd also love to hear that. And if you're looking to improve your business negotiations, please jump on our website, nicoledavidsonnegotiation.com.au. You'll find a host of blog posts with really great advice to improve your negotiations. You'll also get access to the negotiation planning template, which is a really simple document that you can use to make sure that you've covered off all your bases before you get into a negotiation. You may also like to download my book, The A to Z of Negotiation, which is available via my website or on Amazon. Alternatively, jump on the phone, give me a call. I'd love to have a chat and see if there's anything I can do to help you with your next negotiation. Until season 2, thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. If you've taken away some great tips from this episode, I'd love to hear about it, so please connect with me via my website or LinkedIn. If you're enjoying the podcast and would like to learn more tips to improve your negotiations, head to our website, nicoledavidsonnegotiation.com.au, where you can follow my blog, watch presentations, and download resource sheets. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you get every episode as it comes out. If you have an interesting negotiation story that you'd like to share with my audience, head to the website and complete a guest application. Until the next episode, happy negotiating.